The year is 1258 AD. The air over the Tigris River does not smell of spices or jasmine. It smells of sulfur, wet ash, and the copper tang of old blood. If you look at the water, it is swirling with two unnatural colors. To the west, a ribbon of iron-red blood flows from the necks of 800,000 slaughtered citizens. To the east, a spreading stain of black ink dissolves into the current. A Mongol horseman rides his stallion across a bridge, but it is not a bridge of wood or stone. His horse's hooves are crushing the leather bindings of Aristotle, the soggy pages of Plato, and the dissolving star charts of the ancients. He is riding on the sum total of human knowledge, now reduced to trash in the water. We are told this was a tragedy of barbarians destroying civilization, but the truth is far more unsettling. Was the House of Wisdom the savior of the human mind, or was it a golden cage for secrets that were never meant to be found? Before there was a House of Wisdom, there had to be a House of Power. And the foundation of Baghdad was not laid with bricks, but with paranoia. In the year 762 AD, the Caliph al-Mansur was the most powerful man on earth, the leader of the vast Abbasid Empire. But he was a man haunted by the fear of assassination. He needed a new capital, a place that was not just a city, but a weapon, a machine designed to protect him and project ultimate authority. He chose a location that had been sacred for millennia, a patch of fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers near the ruins of ancient Babylon. It was the crossroads of the world. But the design of the city was something the world had never seen. Al-Mansur did not build a sprawling metropolis like Rome or Constantinople. He was obsessed with sacred geometry. He ordered his architects to design a perfect circle. They called it the Round City. It was immense, 2 kilometers in diameter, surrounded by 3 concentric walls of massive mud bricks. 4 imposing gates pointed to the 4 corners of the empire. It was a design born of deep astrological calculation. The first bricks were laid at the precise moment the planets Jupiter and Mars were in favorable alignment. It was an attempt to build a cosmic engine on Earth. The construction was a feat of brute force. 100,000 laborers, slaves, and artisans were drafted from across the known world. They worked under the whip and the scorching Mesopotamian sun. The cost was astronomical. Millions of silver dirhams were poured into the mud. When it was finished, the round city was a marvel of totalitarian order. The outer rings were for the army and the markets. The inner ring was for the bureaucracy. And in the dead center, under a massive green dome that shimmered in the heat, sat the Golden Gate Palace of the Caliph. It was a city built like a target, with al-Mansur at the bullseye. It was magnificent, but it was also a gilded cage. And it was here, inside this fortress built on fear and slave labor, that the Caliph's obsession turned from security to something even more dangerous: the hoarding of every scrap of knowledge in the human world. Why did the Caliphs of Baghdad, men of immense religious piety, suddenly become obsessed with the pagan science of the Greeks? Why risk heresy to translate the works of atheists and idolaters? The answer lies in a dream that changed history. The legend centers on the Caliph al-Mamun, the grandson of the city's founder. Al-Mamun was an intellectual, a rationalist, and a man deeply troubled by the contradictions of his faith. One night, he fell into a restless sleep inside the green dome. In his dream, the palace filled with a strange, silvery light. A man appeared to him, an old man with a pale face, a broad forehead, and piercing blue eyes, wearing a simple Greek tunic. He sat on the Caliph's throne with an aura of absolute calm. Al-Mamun asked in terror, "Who are you?" The figure replied, "I am Aristotle." The Caliph, trembling, asked the ghost a question that had plagued him: "What is good?" Aristotle did not answer with scripture, he answered with logic. "That which is good in the mind," he said, "and that which is good in the law." The Caliph woke up in a cold sweat. The message was radical. Reason and faith were not enemies, they were twins. God gave humans a brain to understand his creation. Therefore, to study science, to study the stars, the anatomy of the eye, or the logic of mathematics was the highest form of worship. This dream was the spark that lit the bonfire. Al-Mamun woke up with a singular, maniacal purpose. He didn't just want some books, he wanted all of them. He declared a new jihad, but this was not a war for territory, it was a war for data. He sent agents, knowledge hunters, out of the gates of Baghdad. They were not spies looking for enemy armies, they were spies looking for dusty manuscripts. They infiltrated the monasteries of Syria, the crumbling libraries of Constantinople, and the markets of India. Their orders were simple: find the lost wisdom of the ancients, steal it if you have to, buy it if you can, but do not come back empty-handed. The House of Wisdom was no longer just a library, it was the materialized dream of a man who believed a ghost had told him to unlock the universe. History is often driven by greed, but usually that greed is for land or oil. In 9th century Baghdad, the currency of power shifted. The Caliph made a decree that sounded like the rambling of a madman, yet it created the single most valuable economy on earth. He announced that any scholar who brought him a book he did not already possess, be it a treatise on Greek geometry, Persian astronomy, or Indian medicine, would be rewarded not with praise, but with the book's weight in gold dust. To understand the insanity of this offer, we must look at the numbers. A standard heavy manuscript, bound in leather and wood, weighed approximately 2 kilograms. In 830 AD, 2 kilograms of gold was equivalent to 450 gold dinars. For context, a skilled master builder earned 2 dinars a month. A single book was worth 18 years of a common man's salary. The Caliph was effectively paying $120,000 in modern currency for a single used book. At the height of the project, the House of Wisdom was spending nearly 20% of the empire's entire GDP on translation and acquisition, more than they spent on the army. This economic explosion distorted reality. Suddenly, the most dangerous job in the world wasn't being a soldier, it was being a book runner. Caravans arriving from Constantinople were ambushed not for their silk or spices, but for their paper. Baghdad became a city of ink-stained millionaires. Fraudsters began forging ancient Greek texts, baking the pages to make them look old, just to put them on the Caliph's scale. Heavy lead plates were secretly sewn into the bindings to cheat the weight. But the Caliph didn't care. He paid it all. The treasury emptied and the shelves filled. The House of Wisdom became a black hole, sucking in the intellectual wealth of the entire planet through the sheer gravitational pull of gold. We often picture the House of Wisdom as a quiet, serene library where old men whispered in the stacks. This is a lie. The House of Wisdom was not a library. It was a factory. It was a loud, industrial sweatshop of the mind. Inside the complex, the noise would have been deafening. It was the sound of 100 men reading aloud in 4 different languages simultaneously: Syriac, Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit, while scribes frantically scratched their words onto paper. It was an assembly line. At the head of this machine sat the translator general, a Nestorian Christian named Hunayn ibn Ishaq. He was a genius, but he was also a tyrant of accuracy. He realized that a literal translation was useless. If you translate Aristotle word for word, it sounds like gibberish. You have to translate the meaning, not the sentence. So Hunayn invented a new method. He created a collaborative system, a human algorithm. Step 1. A specialist in Greek would read the original text and summarize the meaning. Step 2. A specialist in Syriac, a language close to Arabic, would create a rough draft. Step 3. An Arabic master poet would polish the draft into perfect flowing prose. Step 4. A scientist would review the math to ensure the poet hadn't ruined the equations. They were inventing new words in real time. The Arabic language, the language of desert nomads and poets, did not have words for retina or algorithm or metaphysics. So they built the language from scratch. They smashed words together. They took Greek words and Arabized them. They were literally coding the operating system of modern science. But the pressure was immense. The Caliph demanded results. Translators worked until their eyes failed in the dim lamplight. They developed chronic back pain and ink poisoning. It was a grueling, high-stakes operation where a single mistranslated number in an astronomical table could lead to a ship crashing or a building collapsing, and the translator losing his head. There was a hidden barrier stopping the growth of human knowledge, and it wasn't intellectual, it was physical. Before Baghdad, books were incredibly heavy and prohibitively expensive. They were written on parchment made from stretched animal skins. It took an entire flock of sheep to create one copy of the Bible, or on brittle Egyptian papyrus that rotted in humidity. You cannot build a global scientific empire on dead sheep. The breakthrough happened far from Baghdad, on the banks of the Tigris River in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. In 751 AD, the Abbasid army clashed with the Tang dynasty of China. The Muslims won, capturing thousands of Chinese prisoners. Among these prisoners were men with a peculiar set of skills. They were not soldiers, they were industrial engineers. In exchange for their freedom, they revealed a state secret that China had guarded for centuries, the art of making paper. They showed their captors how to take rags, hemp, and mulberry bark, mash them into a pulp, soak them in water, and press them with bamboo screens into thin, durable, lightweight sheets. When this technology reached Baghdad, it changed everything faster than the printing press would centuries later. The city was transformed. Massive paper mills sprung up along the Tigris, powered by water wheels, churning out cheap white sheets by the ton. Suddenly, a book wasn't a luxury item for a king, it was a tool for a student. Knowledge was democratized. The bureaucracy exploded. Government records, tax receipts, and scientific diagrams could be mass-produced. The House of Wisdom stopped being a repository of heavy scrolls and became the world's first true data center, powered by the simple miracle of wood pulp. Science was not born in a clean white classroom. It was born in the dark, amidst smoke and whispering. And its father was not a physicist, but a magician. In the basement levels of the House of Wisdom, far away from the scribes copying Aristotle, lived the alchemists. Their leader was a figure of shadow and legend, Jabir ibn Hayyan, known to the West as Geber. He is the father of chemistry, the man who gave us the words alkali and alembic. But to his contemporaries, he was a sorcerer attempting to hack the code of creation itself. Jabir was obsessed with a concept called takween, the artificial creation of life. Ancient texts whisper that Jabir succeeded. It is said that in his secret laboratory, he cultivated artificial creatures in glass vessels, snakes, scorpions, and even a homunculus, a tiny living human being grown from chemical mixtures without a mother. Legend tells that he could breathe life into stone and control the souls of the inanimate matter. However, modern historians believe these monsters were actually complex chemical reactions that simply looked like life to the uneducated eye. Jabir had discovered how to create chemical gardens, silicate salts growing into plant-like shapes in solution, and how to distill alcohol and acids that frothed and moved violently when mixed. He wasn't making ghosts, he was discovering sulfuric acid. But the line was thin. Jabir wrote his books in a code so complex that the word gibberish is derived from his name. He claimed that knowledge was too dangerous for the common man. He invented the alendic still, a device to purify souls, which we now use to distill vodka. He classified the elements not just by weight, but their spiritual properties. In the flickering light of his furnace, the distinction between science and magic didn't exist. He was trying to find the philosopher's stone, not to get rich, but to cure the imperfection of base metals, and perhaps the imperfection of man himself. The House of Wisdom was not just a place of theory, it was a place of terrifying application. While the alchemists worked in the basement, the engineers worked in the high towers. The most famous among them were the Banu Musa brothers, 3 geniuses who wrote the Book of Ingenious Devices. They were the fathers of automation, but to the foreign envoys visiting Baghdad, they were necromancers. Visitors to the Caliph's palace reported seeing impossible things. They claimed that statues would pour wine by themselves, that metal servants would hand them towels, and most famously, that a massive tree made of silver and gold stood in the central courtyard. On its branches sat birds made of precious metals that would flap their wings and sing real songs. The envoys whispered that the Caliph had trapped jinn, spirits of fire, inside the metal to make them move. The truth was purely mechanical, but no less miraculous. The Banu Musa had mastered the science of hydrostatics and pneumatics. The singing tree was a massive hydraulic engine. Hidden pipes pumped air and water at precise pressures through the trunk. As the water shifted, it tripped levers and camshafts, the same technology used in modern car engines, which forced air through hidden whistles in the birds' beaks and moved their hinged wings. It was the uncanny valley of the 9th century. These machines were designed to shock and awe. The Caliph used them as a weapon of diplomacy. When a barbarian king entered the throne room and saw a statue bowing to him, he realized he was facing a civilization that could command matter itself. They were not magic, they were the ancestors of the computer, programmed not with code, but with water. While engineers built toys for the palace, doctors were fighting a war in the trenches of the human body. Baghdad was home to the Bimaristan, literally the house of the sick. It was the first true hospital in history, a place where the mentally ill were treated with music rather than chains, and where the poor were treated for free. But progress required a gruesome price. To save the living, the doctors had to explore the dead. Rumors swirled in the back alleys of Baghdad that the doctors were necromancers who stole bodies from fresh graves to converse with the dead. People whispered that the screams coming from the surgical wards were not from patients, but from souls being tormented. The reality was clinical, but bloody. The great surgeon al-Zarawi, the father of surgery, was not a necromancer, he was an anatomist. He invented over 200 surgical instruments that we still use today: scalpels, bone saws, and forceps. But without anesthesia, surgery was a scene from a horror movie. Patients were held down by strong men while the doctor worked with terrifying speed. To stop the bleeding, they used cauterization, pressing a red-hot iron directly onto the open wound. The smell of burning flesh was the scent of survival. Yet, amidst this brutality, they discovered the circulation of blood centuries before Europe. They performed the first cancer surgeries, slicing out tumors with obsidian sharpness. They realized that fever was not a demon possession, but the body's natural defense system. The hospital of the damned was actually the only place on earth where you had a fighting chance to live. In the quietest corner of the House of Wisdom sat a man named Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He was a librarian, a man of dust and ink, but in the year 820 AD, he published a book with a title that would echo forever. الكتاب المختصر في حساب الجبر والمقابلة. The word al-Jabr means the restoring of broken parts. It is the root of the word algebra. Before al-Khwarizmi, mathematics was physical. It was geometry, measuring land, weighing grain, counting bricks. If you couldn't see it, you couldn't count it. But al-Khwarizmi did something terrifying. He detached numbers from reality. He created X, the unknown. He proved that you could solve problems using abstract rules step by step. We call this step-by-step process an algorithm, a word derived directly from his name, al-Khwarizmi to algorithmi. His most radical import was from India, a strange circle-shaped number called sifr, 0. To the religious zealots of the time, the concept of 0 was bordering on heresy. How could nothing be something? God is everything, therefore the void is the realm of the devil. 0 was the number of the abyss. But al-Khwarizmi saw 0 not as a void, but as a placeholder. Without 0, you cannot distinguish between 1, 10, and 100 easily. With 0, mathematics became infinite. He gave the world the decimal system, 0 to 9. Suddenly, calculations that took days with Roman numerals, RMCMLXXXIV multiplied by is a nightmare, could be done in seconds. This was the software update the human species had been waiting for. It allowed architects to design impossible domes, astronomers to predict eclipses centuries in advance, and merchants to build global banking networks. Al-Khwarizmi didn't just write a book, he wrote the source code for the modern world. Every time you use a computer, every time you check your phone, you are walking through the door that he opened in 9th century Baghdad. Empires rarely die from murder. They die from suicide. Long before the Mongols arrived, the House of Wisdom began to rot from the inside out. For 2 centuries, Baghdad had been ruled by the Mu'tazila, rationalists who believed the Quran was created and that logic was a gift from God. But in the 11th century, the pendulum swung back with violent force. A new school of thought took hold, led by the charismatic theologian Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali wrote a book with the title that was a declaration of war, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. The new orthodoxy claimed that seeking laws of nature was blasphemy. They argued that fire does not burn cotton because of heat. Fire burns cotton because God wills it at that exact moment. To say that A causes B is to put chains on God's power. They whispered that mathematics was a gateway to atheism and that astronomers were trying to spy on the angels. This was the end of the scientific method in the public square. The House of Wisdom, once a noisy factory of debate, fell silent. Funding dried up. The knowledge hunters were recalled. Scientists who had once dined with Caliphs were now accused of heresy. Books weren't burned yet, but they were shelved and forgotten. The curiosity that had built the round city was replaced by a terrified dogma. The city turned inward. They stopped looking at the stars and started only looking at the text. When a civilization decides that it already knows all the answers, it stops asking questions. And when you stop asking questions, you don't see the storm gathering on the horizon. Baghdad had blinded itself just as the greatest predator in history was saddling his horse in the east. While Baghdad was arguing about theology, a storm was eating the east. The Mongols were unlike any army the world had ever seen. They didn't just conquer cities, they erased them. In 1258, the storm arrived at the gates of the Middle East. It was led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis. He was a man who collected kingdoms like stamps. He had already crushed the assassins in their mountain fortresses, a feat everyone said was impossible. Now he wanted the big prize. The numbers of his army were terrifying. He commanded 150,000 cavalrymen, the largest Mongol army ever assembled in the West. The column of troops stretched for hundreds of miles. They brought with them 1,000 Chinese engineering experts specifically to build siege engines. They moved with a speed that defied logic, covering distances in days that took other armies weeks. The Caliph of Baghdad, al-Mustasim, was given a chance to surrender. Hulagu sent a letter. "The iron is not yet in the fire. Do not make yourself the fuel." But the Caliph was delusional. He was surrounded by sycophants who told him he was invincible. He believed that if the Mongols attacked, the entire Muslim world, from India to Spain, would rise up to defend the holy city. He sent back a mocking reply, calling the Khan a young dog. It was the worst diplomatic mistake in human history. The young dog didn't bark. He just signaled the advance. The ground began to shake, not from an earthquake, but from 600,000 hooves beating a rhythm of death. The scourge of God had arrived. We often think of medieval sieges as months-long affairs of starvation and waiting. The Siege of Baghdad took less than 2 weeks. It began on January 29, 1258, and it ended on February 10. It wasn't a battle, it was an industrial demolition. Terrified residents wrote that the Mongols commanded demons of fire. They reported dragons flying over the walls and exploding in green flames that water could not extinguish. They believed the apocalypse had literally begun and that the gates of hell had opened in the sky. The dragons were actually advanced military technology brought from China. The Mongols were using primitive gunpowder bombs and ceramic pots filled with naphtha, a sticky petroleum-based jelly similar to modern napalm. When launched from their massive counterweight trebuchets, these pots didn't just break the walls, they liquefied the defenders. The House of Wisdom, filled with scholars who studied geometry, was destroyed by an army that applied geometry. The Mongol engineers calculated the trajectory of their shots with mathematical perfection. They built a palisade around the entire city in 24 hours to prevent anyone from escaping. They dammed the canals to flood the Caliph's army. On the 13th day, the Caliph realized the truth. His invincible city was a trap. He walked out of the Golden Gate with his sons and 3,000 dignitaries to surrender, hoping to buy his life with the gold he had hoarded. Hulagu Khan looked at him not with anger, but with curiosity. He asked the Caliph a simple question. "If you are the master of this land, why did you not turn your iron into arrows and your gold into soldiers?" The sacking of Baghdad lasted for 7 days. It was a week of unimaginable violence, where the population was reduced from 1 million to a graveyard. But for the House of Wisdom, the end came with a specific, systematic cruelty. The Mongols did not just burn the library. Fire moves too fast. It leaves ash that blows away. They wanted to make a statement that would last. They wanted to drown the culture itself. Soldiers entered the great halls. They didn't read the titles. They didn't check if the books were the Holy Quran or the mathematics of Al-Khwarizmi. To them, it was just leather and paper. They formed human chains, passing the priceless volumes out of the windows and down to the riverbanks. Survivors claimed that the Tigris River turned black with ink for miles downstream. They said the water became so thick with dissolving words that it was poisonous to drink, and that the spirits of the philosophers could be heard screaming from the mud. They believed the river itself was weeping mourning clothes. The truth is even more devastating. The Black River wasn't a myth. It was a physical reality caused by the sheer volume of chemistry. The ink used in Baghdad was made of lampblack and gallnuts. When millions of pages are soaked simultaneously, the dye leaches out. The Mongols used the books to build a bridge. They piled the manuscripts into the water, layer upon layer, until the sodden mounds were stable enough for their horses to ride across. The cavalry of the Khan trampled over the works of Plato, the medical encyclopedias of al-Zahrawi, and the star charts of the Persians. 1,000 years of human thought was turned into a muddy ramp for a horse's hoof. In a single afternoon, the intellectual center of the world was rebooted to zero. We still don't know what we lost that day. There were likely books on optics, engineering, and history that, if they had survived, might have jump-started the Renaissance 3 centuries early. Instead, they floated away, dissolving into the Persian Gulf. Baghdad was dead. The canals that had watered the desert for 5,000 years collapsed. The population never fully recovered. The physical house of wisdom was gone, erased so completely that today archaeologists cannot even agree on where it stood. But the idea of the house didn't die in the river. It pulled a trick that Al-Khwarizmi would have appreciated. It became an algorithm. It detached itself from the hardware, the city, and became software. One man, the astronomer Nasr al-Din al-Tusi, saw the end coming. He did the unthinkable. He defected to the Mongols. He convinced Hulagu Khan that he could read the stars for the empire. In exchange, he was allowed to save a fraction of the library and build a new observatory in the mountains of Moraga. From this small lifeboat, the knowledge drifted west. It traveled through the trade routes to Spain and Italy. 300 years later, when Copernicus revolutionized astronomy, he used mathematical models identical to Tusi's planetary couples. When Christopher Columbus sailed to America, he used navigation tables calculated in the Baghdad desert. When you type a password into your phone today, the encryption relies on the algebra invented in the House of Wisdom. We often look at the ruins of the Middle East and see only tragedy. But look closer at your own world. The House of Wisdom is not a pile of bricks in Iraq. It is the invisible operating system of the 21st century. We are living inside their ghost. The Mongols conquered the land, but the ink conquered the future.